Good morning. You are in the West Coast of the United States, like myself. Good afternoon if you are in the East Coast. Good evening if you are joining us from Europe, Turkey, or the region. My name is Baki Tezcan. I teach history at the University of California in Davis. I also convene the various OTSA meetings by now. We have a series that we call What's Up that you are now about to join. Basically, you're joining. And then we also have Turkey Now. And then we have something called the OTSA Co-op as well. Today's meeting is devoted to introducing you to a database, building a biographical database for the Ottoman Ulema. Challenges, opportunities, and research prospects. I will introduce to you in a minute my colleague Abdurrahman Atçıl, who will be chairing the session. He will in turn introduce his team to you, each one of whom has a short presentation, at the end of which you'll all have a sense of this database they've been building and are about to make public online for everybody's use. So Abdurrahman Atçıl received his PhD at University of Chicago and actually had a position in New York at Queens College, which he, after 4 years, left to go back to Turkey. And that is the reason why I'd like to open just a bit longer his introduction. I usually keep these introductions very short because we only have an hour, so we should just move on. But I really want to take a moment because what Abdurrahman did, I think, was quite, rare, having a job in the United States and then leaving it to go back to Turkey to sort of return the brain drain. So in that sense, I really find his move quite remarkable. He published this book that all of us know now, Scholars and Sultans in the Early Modern Ottoman Empire, which also appeared in Turkish as Alimler ve Sultanlar. Soon after that, he published 16. Yüzyıl Ulema Defterleri he co-edited, which is a source publication, by the way. So he made it available for the larger scholarly community, several records that are kept in the Topkapı Palace. And so now you can peruse through them and see the development of the ulema. His work on the ulema and the term that he coined, scholarly, bureaucratic scholars, scholarly bureaucrats, is really explains so much about the transformation of, as he puts it, more cosmopolitan and more autonomous scholars into kind of a bureaucracy within the state. And that, I think, enables us to see the Ottoman ulema in a very good and productive light that helps us analyze this sort of significance of the Ottoman ulema in respect to earlier Islamic states and their relationships with the ulema. He has many articles, and I'm not going to go through them. I just want to show only one of them because it's interesting that one of his articles actually got translated into Arabic and became a short book in Egypt. That is the one that is about the justice system and law in Egypt after the Ottoman conquest, so the transition from Memluk to the Ottoman system. Abdurrahman, when he went back to Turkey, was teaching at Istanbul Şehir University, which unfortunately was closed down by the Turkish government. Luckily for us, Sabancı University got him, and with him, Sabancı University got this wonderful European Research Council grant on which Abdurrahman started working last year. But he's not going to talk about that work today. Today, he's going to introduce you a database that he'd been working on with some support from İSAM. And I also want to take a moment here for those of you who are not familiar with İSAM to know İSAM is the Islamic Center for Islamic Studies in Istanbul. It's a wonderful library. And then the library has this online catalog. But in the catalog, those of you who are new to the field might not know this, there are several databases. So if you go to Dokümantasyon Veri Tabanı, for instance, you get to the bibliographical files that the Encyclopedia of Islam, the Turkish version Encyclopedia of Islam, keeps. So the bibliographies of those articles are updated. So if you want to start a new research project and you consulted the article in the Encyclopedia of Islam and you want to know what else has been published since, you can go look at that. There are several databases here that are about that include full PDFs of articles, of old articles in Ottoman Turkish, short leaflets, etc. So I would strongly recommend you have a look at it. They also have an English interface, and then they have what most people know İSAM for is the they have the catalog of all Turkish. Turkish, Arabic, Persian, etc., all the manuscripts held in Turkish manuscript libraries. The Yazmalar site usually was not giving us a lot of access to Süleymaniye, but İSAM does, and so that is very useful too. All right, I took a lot of time, and I'm going to end right here simply by announcing what is coming up in next month for OTSA viewers. We're going to have an OTSA co-op meeting where we're going to talk about translating the Ottomans, featuring the newly published The Ottoman World and Prisoner of the Infidels, with the co-editors of The Ottoman World, Helga Anetshofer and Hakan Karateke, as well as the editor and translator of Prisoner of the Infidels, Giancarlo Casale, will be with us. And then in the next episode of What's Up in Ottoman and Turkish Studies, we will talk about Ottoman religious politics in the confessional age, where we will see another European Research Council grant in operation. Tiana Kristic and Derin Terzioğlu will share with us the work that they've been doing in their project, the Otto Confession. All right, Abdurrahman, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for this generous introduction, Baki Hocam. I also want to thank you for inviting us to WhatsApp meeting and giving us this opportunity to introduce our work on the Ulema database supported by the Center for Islamic Studies, known as İSAM. This database is a work in progress. As you said at the beginning, we are still working on it and are planning to make it public by the end of the year. Today, we will try to introduce our work. I know it is a bit strange. It is not available for public use, but we are introducing it. In fact, I and my friends and I wanted to make it ready by the time of this meeting. Baki Hocam, you know that I requested extension a couple of times to make it, you know, to introduce what is available for use. But unfortunately, we could not finish the design and front end preparation by this time. That's why we are going to talk about the thing that will be available by the end of the year. I myself will talk about the project in general, introducing the content, scope, and ambitions of the project. And then Salih Günaydın will talk about the technical design and infrastructure of the project. And after this, Gürzat Kami and Abdullah Karaarslan we'll introduce the research projects that use the type of the data that we collect, organize, and present in this database. So let me share my presentation. So the İSAM Ulema database project started in 2019. First, we undertook a pilot project to develop the architecture of the database. We took Ahmet Taşköprüzade's Eşşakâik-ı Numaniyye fi Ulema et-Devle el-Uthmaniyye as the starting point. We identified the data entities, fields, and types, and prepared the lists of the types based on Eşşakâik. In other words, we did not start with a pre-designed categories and relations among them, but started from the source with the ambition to include all information which can be abstracted and standardized. So the designing the database and collecting and organizing data, these two jobs continued together in the phase of the pilot project. So this lasted for about a year. We designed the database and recorded all the information, almost all the information in Eşşakâik-ı Numaniyye as data in our database. So we make adjustments and developments according to the data that we find in the source. The second phase of the project started in the January of 2021. In that phase, we extended the geographical and temporal scope and started to work on Atayi's Hadaikul Hakaik and Sheikhi's Vakaiul Fuzala, which mostly covered the biographies of the scholars from Anatolia and the Balkans from the 17th and 18th centuries. In that phase, we also began to work on Necmettin Al-Ghazi's Al-Kawakib al-Sa'ira and Lutf al-Samar and Al-Muhibbi's Khulasatul Athar. These last works, Al-Kawakib al-Sa'ira, Lutf al-Samar, and Khulasatul Athar, mostly include the biographies of the scholars from the Arab lands during the Ottoman period. The extension of the geographical and temporal scope, of course, required some adjustments in the database, such as the addition of new categories and extension of the lists to be able to record the types of the data that did not exist in Eşşakâik. For example, in Eşşakâik, Mülazemet doesn't appear as a relation type, while it is a frequently mentioned relation type in Atayi and Sheikhi. The professional positions, for example, Sheikhul Qurra, Katibus Sir, Kefil, Nazirul Jaysh, appear in Al-Kawakib, while these positions do not appear in Eşşakâik. We added these types to our lists. These are just examples. We made many changes to be able to record, to be able to enter the information that are available in the sources that we include in the second stage of the second phase of the project. Now a larger team is working on developing the database, entering data in it. Actually, perhaps I have to thank all other researchers in the project. We decided to present this database. Four of us decided to present the database today, but our team includes 10 researchers. These 4 people are not the only people who developed the database and made entries in it. Actually, the other friends are also in the meeting. I have to acknowledge their contribution to this project as well. So by the end of 2022, we hope that the database will contain data on the lives of over 8,000 scholars, Sufis, poets, and statesmen. I just mentioned how we started and progressed. Now I want to go a little bit into detail to underline the ambitions of the project. As I said, or as I implied, we adopted a bottom-up approach and developed the database based on the sources. We aim to record all biographical information that can be standardized as data. While doing this, we try to preserve the categories in the sources as much as possible. Actually, we can say that the authors of these biographical dictionaries, the sources that we take as the starting point, the Tabakat works, the authors of these works usually worked with the logic of database, generally speaking, of course, and tried to use terms and categories consistently. For example, Shakaiq consistently use al-Mawla for people who are famous for their expertise in religious sciences, while it uses a sheikh for people who are famous for their mystical inclinations and guidance. The author of Shakaiq, Tashköprüzade, also used standardized categories for the relationships, such as tedris, intisab, iltisak, sohbet, etc. So in the project, we preserved these categories that the authors of the works that we work on use as they appear in the source. We link every data point with the source, including the page numbers. We use the categories that they use, and we record it, and we just point where we get this particular information. So keeping the categories in the source make it possible to filter data according to the categories in the source. For example, we can filter Shakaiq. In our database, we have now more than 5 sources. We can filter Shakaiq, and this will isolate the entries, or this will isolate all the people who are mentioned in a Shakaiq, and add another filter for all sheikhs, and add another filter for the instances of sohbet. So keeping the categories of the sources actually make it possible for us to keep the perspective of the authors in the database. However, this is good. Actually, the researcher can use the database and benefit from the facility it provides, but still keep the perspective of the author. This is good, but this also has limitations. Doing research, for example, on multiple sources from the perspective of their authors creates some problems and difficulties, especially in the cases that the authors have different perspectives and use distinctive terminologies. For example, in giving biographical information, Al-Kawakib use some categories that Ash-Shaqaiq doesn't use. For example, in the places where Ash-Shaqaiq use the category of Al-Mawla, Al-Kawakib may use the category of Ash-Shaykh. So I said that we keep the categories of the sources. So we have the Mawlas of Ash-Shaqaiq and we have the Sheikhs of Al-Kawakib. But from the perspective of the researcher, we know that these Sheikhs and Mawlas are similar types of people or similar people. Both are, people in both categories are famous for their expertise in the Islamic studies or in the religious sciences. So our solution for bringing together Ash-Shaqaiq's Mawla and Al-Kawakib's Sheikh is to allow the researcher to record both Mawla and Sheikh as Alim, so that to bring them together under a different and a higher category. So we also created our own categories to be able to bring together this disparate data, but still we have the opportunity to go back to the original and to recover the perspective of the authors of the sources. The sources may name periods and regions with their own distinctive terminologies. For example, the reign of Bayazid without giving the dates. It is a range of time. We also recorded all these, but also we determined the calendar equivalences of these dates. And we did the same thing for geographical categories. We recorded what is available in the sources, but also determined, try to define our own categories for the division of the geography. So this procedure made it possible for us to combine disparate data extracted from different sources and filter them with a single category applicable to all. So we both keep the perspective of the sources and also provide the infrastructure to combine them, to make search combining all different sources. Finally, we arrange data in a way that maximizes its versatility, adaptability, and expandability. We follow a semantic database model. Salih will explain this better. But I can say that our infrastructure is suitable for including data about new periods and regions, and it is also suitable for making adjustments and recategorizations. As I said in the beginning, this is an ongoing project and a work in progress. We are going to open the initial product soon, but we will continue to develop. Currently, we have text search and basic filtering functions. But we want to develop functions for combining multiple queries. This will enable researchers to form research questions and to explore them through using the database. We will add visual components to represent search results in the database. These visual components will include timelines, genealogical trees, network maps, bar charts, maps, etc. In addition, I expect that the number of the entries will increase very fast. As I said before, the current plan is to have data for more than 8,000 people by the end of the next year. But if the administration of İSAM decides to create new projects, this number will be more than this. We also want to increase the number of entries through crowdsourcing. Researchers or others will have the chance to volunteer and submit biographical data about the scholars of the past or today. There will be a portal for this. The only requirement for the volunteers will be to link the submitted data with a source, written or visual, whatever. After the data are submitted by the volunteers, we will initiate a process of editing and verification to keep the integrity of the database. So we will keep our high standards. It is going to be open for volunteer contribution or for crowdsourcing, but we will continue the process of editing before publishing the new entries by others. We think that what we develop is not only a mine of information to which researchers can go and get the particular piece of information they need. It is this, it is a mine of information. If the researcher just wants to know the death date of Abu Suud, they will be able to find it there. But we want it to be more than this. We want it to be a research tool for the researchers, especially Islamicists. We expect them to bring their research questions and or the sources to the database, and expect them to store, process, and manipulate the data using this database. So it is not only a storage for a great number of data, but it is also a tool. If any researcher wants to use this tool, it will be available for their use, and they will be able to store the data in their sources and process, visualize, and all other things available in the database. When fully developed, the Ulema database will include a huge amount of information about a great number of people from different regions and periods. This will enable researchers to explore big questions. For example, it will be possible to ask the question, who were the scholars who were born in Iraq in the 14th century, visited Anatolia, and produced a work in jurisprudence? So we can, filter the different fields and click enter, and then we will have a list, and we will be able to organize the results, according to the different criteria, and we will be able to visualize the results in different formats. Or it is possible to ask the question, which books in the category of theology were the most commented on in Anatolia in the 17th century? When the database is fully developed, we will be able to ask such questions and get results easily. So we can ask, in addition, we can ask and explore the questions about the mobility of people and books through using the database. Again, we can extract data and process them in other software programs to group regions and people on the basis of a particular criteria. In short, we hope that Ulema database will serve a tool for researchers to pursue big questions about the Islamic world and beyond, and open new horizons for Islamicists. So I think I passed my time a little bit. Now I want to stop and introduce our next speaker, Salih Günaydın, who will talk about the technical aspects of the project. Let me first. Salih Günaydın graduated from the University of Leuven in Belgium with an MA in electrotechnical engineering in 2006. He worked for several years as a software engineering consultant in Belgium and the Netherlands. Later, he added another dimension to his education by moving to the field of Islamic Studies, and obtained an MA in Islamic Theology from Marmara University in 2013 with a thesis on the philosophical discussions around the concepts of space and the void in the thought of Fahrettin Razi. He worked as a research assistant at Istanbul Şehir University, where he taught undergraduate courses on Islamic creed, theology, history of philosophy, Sufism, and other subjects. Besides his work for İSAM Ulema database, he is currently working on the OTTOLEGAL project at Sabancı University, where he provides solutions for the entire data life cycle from acquisition and storage to exploration and analysis. So without further ado, I will let Salih to speak about the technical aspects of the Ulema database. Salih.
Thank you, John. So good evening, everyone. In my presentation, I will try to give an overview of the capabilities of our application, elaborate a bit more on what Abdurrahman Hoca already told, but I will also try to avoid as much as possible too much technical details. Of course, any detailed questions that you might have can be addressed later on in the Q&A. So I'll start with sharing my presentation. Okay, so I want to first talk about these 4 high-level features of our database that are of interest for academic history researchers, and that are also necessary in our view in order to build a platform that will be usable as an academic reference source and a research tool. Firstly, we have ensured that only sourced data that is entered into the database, meaning all data points are linked to a specific historical textual source. This allows for aggregating data from various sources and also for storing potentially conflicting data points and gives the ability to check the data and correct it at a later stage if needed. At a later point, it could be used to compare biographies and trends as seen from different sources. Secondly, we have put processes in place to guarantee the verification of the data. At this stage, data is entered manually by researchers who are knowledgeable about the historical source material and double-checked by an independent reviewer. So data cannot be changed without the required authorizations, but users, also later end users, can always leave comments on individual data points, suggesting additions or corrections. Thirdly, each and every edit to all data points is versioned, meaning a complete history of the data itself is retained in the database as well. This provides backward compatibility and accountability, but this of course can also make the data volatile, meaning from the perspective of the end user, the data might change at any moment if a new source is added by a new researcher. So in order to add some stability to the system so researchers can use it in their academic work, the database is also periodically versioned as a whole. That way, an end user, when citing the database, can always refer to a stable, time-stamped version of the data. And finally, this also allows for time-stamped queries, meaning any query can be reproduced at any time, any point in time, and return the same results, even though the latest version of the underlying data might have been updated. So since a picture is worth 1,000 words, I'll show the simplified diagram of our data model first, and then continue with some of the details on the next slide. So we'll just keep showing the model on the top right here for reference. I hope it's visible. It still remains visible. So as you can infer from the diagram, our data model consists of 5 main entities: persons, places, works, institutes, and sources. And each of these stored entities has a stable identity, so it can be referred to and used from anywhere in the data model. Since we're working mostly on biographies at the moment, it is only natural that the person model is the most detailed, and therefore I'll give some more information about that. But just as a side, it's just as well possible with the same backend and basic data model to start, for example, a bibliographical project and keep adding to the same database and enriching the overall data. At the moment, we can store 15 different attribute types for each person, along with some additional project-specific attributes. This is the part that Abdurrahman Hoca mentioned about source-specific attribute types as well as project-specific, so more general abstract types that we overlay over the data. And these can all be independently sourced. So you could say that, for example, a person is named as X in a specific source, but a variant X1 in another source, or even store conflicting data about it without enforcing any opinion of the actual truth of the matter. We're also capable of storing source-specific attribute types. This part Abdurrahman Hoca also already mentioned, so we'll just skip that. As an example, this is a part of a data entry form. You can see here some of the attribute types, and also that for each attribute type there can be multiple variations recorded. So meşhur isim, isim, künye, nisbe, and so on. And these are all variations for isim, which are recorded and stored. And each of these instances is individually linked to a source. So we can see here that there are 2 separate source biographies defined for this person's biography. So this is Kemal Paşazade, by the way. Here, red meaning an icon for Şakâik-ı Numaniye, where purple is an icon indicating a specific reference, so a specific page on Al-Kawakib. And when a researcher or an editor is entering data, they would just, so if the same variation is present in the news source, just click this, the icon, corresponding icon to indicate that it's present there, or add a new variation and indicate that it's present in another source. Okay, so of course, a person's biography does not consist of these attributes only, but it is actually centered around important life events in our model. If you will imagine a person's biography as a timeline, which also has a spatial dimension, the life event, by our definition, is some point or some interval in this space with some generic type. Naturally, since we're dealing with historical sources, these spatio-temporal coordinates might actually be unknown or inexact. This is again fully supported by the model. Here I have listed the 10 generic event types that are currently defined. Each of these can also have event type specific attributes, again sourced and stored for each of them separately. For example, a career event of subtype appointment, just to give an example here, can be linked to predecessor and successor data. So when we say that a person is appointed as a qadi at some place, and the source also mentions that they succeed a certain person, you can store that data. And because in the database all data is linked to each other, that data would also appear automatically on the predecessor's page as a corresponding life event and a link back to the person that we are editing at the moment. These life events, of course, in a person's biography would ideally be sorted by their dates. But again, since early sources have missing or incomplete information, this proves impossible most of the time. But still, even if we don't know the exact times of the events, we might know their sequence, which event came after which. Obvious examples are birth coming first and death coming last, or even that some events are overlapping in time. And therefore, our database, our platform also supports the storage of sorting and grouping of life events of each person as an additional data point, which can also be separately sourced. To wrap up the presentation of the data model, I'll just point out that these life events can be linked to social relationships, educational data, like books studied or taught, works produced, charities and endowments, and/or anecdotes, indicating, when they are linked, indicating that those specific items occurred during that specific event. But these items, of course, can also be stored separately as well if there is no relevant data about their date or place in the source. And finally, just a note about the anecdotes that I mentioned here. This is a place that we use to store semi-structured data, so we haven't just made elaborate efforts yet to model this data, but they just seemed so interesting to leave out completely. And in any case, they might be promoted later on with a more semantical treatment. As an example, here I'm showing a travel event in Taşkı Pürzade's biography. So we can see here, for example, that this event is saved or stored as the 4th event in his biography. This is the seyahat, the travel to Amasya. And we can also see stored here that it occurred together with some family members, his father and his uncle from his mother's side. And also that during this, what is apparently an extended seyahat, he studied several books from both of these persons. And we can all store all of this data separately without mixing up which individual education he got from which individual teacher. This is a separate screenshot for data about 2 books. Without going into further detail here, I'll just mention that the data model on books and works is not as extensive as the model on persons as of yet. But again, we're collecting data that is potentially linked to all the other entities in the database, such as its place of composition, any source works that the book is related to, who studied the book, when and where, and also of interest for bibliographical studies, any other books that the work is related to. So we could, in a later stage, build a network of books or automatically derive a hierarchical tree of any literary tradition in a database, which is dynamic and also is updated automatically when the data on books in the database is changed. So in the final part of my presentation, I'll just mention the main searching capabilities of the database. Text-based search, as Abdurrahman Atçıl mentioned, on all the textual attributes in all the available languages supported. Secondly, we support faceted searching or filtering. They can be used to filter, which is mostly known for prosopographical research. Used to filter any group of interest by common attributes. And finally, where it gets most interesting is the ability to pose complex nested queries. Here, you're not filtering only on the attributes of a group, but you're putting restrictions on their relations with other entities in the database, which can all be separately qualified. So to give a simple example again, to show the principle, you could ask to see the persons who were born between 1450 and 1500 in Transaxonia, studied in Syria and later traveled to Anatolia, who authored at least a work in Kalam and a work in Hadith. This is a demonstrator for this proof of principle is already built. So we have a functional working model of this, but we actually want to develop a graphical search interface to give this ability to end users, make it more user friendly. And you can see here a mock representation of how such an interface would look. So a user would indicate, for example, to use the same example, that they're searching for persons which match certain criteria, and that the resulting set of persons should only include those that are authors of books matching separate criteria. This is just a simple example, but this kind of interface could be used to build more complicated queries, only limited by the imagination of the researcher. You could add as many links and qualifications and attributes as you want on such a complicated nested query. The results of these queries can then be downloaded in a standard format for further processing, or shown in tables on the UI or in appropriate visualizations. If I have the time, I'll just give some rudimentary visualization examples and then finish up my presentation. So these are not final, they are still being refined, but they give a good indication of what we want to do. So here we have an interactive ego network of Bostan Effendi, which is pulled from the actual data in the database, which can be filtered by relation type directly in the web UI by the user, and even dynamically extended by clicking on nodes of interest. So here I'm just hiding the labels for the nodes, but these all represent different ulama, scholars, or persons in the database. The second one here on the right is the same network, but filtered to show educational relationships only. The idea is to give the users the ability to look for interesting patterns and trends directly on the platform itself, while also allowing expert users the ability to download the data directly and use it in more advanced and specialized software packages. Here again is another example. We can see the inferred genealogy of Ebu Suud Effendi on the left. We use the data in the database to crawl over all the family relationships of Ebu Suud Effendi and his relations to build up this tree. So most likely no individual biography of all relevant persons. No individual biography actually contains the complete data for this genealogy, but we can use algorithms to aggregate all data in such a tree and even indicate any inconsistencies if they exist. And lastly, on the right, this is a screenshot of some of the life events of Taşköprüzade, which are color-coded and shown on a map. And to conclude, for those interested, this is a table of the current statistics of some of the data in the database. This is mostly from the biographies of Shakaik, since that was completed in the initial phase of the project, and work on entering data from the other biographical sources is still ongoing. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you again for joining in and listening, and I'm happy to answer any further questions you might have in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salih. Our next speaker is Gürzat Kami. Gürzat Kami is a PhD candidate in the History Department of Marmara University and a member of the research team of the OTTOLEGAL project at Sabancı University. His research focuses on the scholars of Bilad al-Sham during the Mamluk-Ottoman transition. He received BA degree from the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Boğaziçi University in 2012. He earned an MA degree from the Department of History at Istanbul Şehir University in 2015 with the thesis entitled Understanding a 16th Century Ottoman Scholar Bureaucrat, Ali bin Bali and His Biographical Dictionary. His research interests include scholarly networks and mobility, the history of education and scholarly production in Ottoman lands during the early modern period, and the application of social network analysis in historical studies. Gürzat.
Thank you very much, Abdurrahman Hocam, and good evening, everyone. I will share my presentation. The purpose of my presentation is to exemplify how we can utilize the available data in our network of scholars. Yes, as historians, we have biographical dictionaries, and as followers of a new trend, digital humanities, we deconstruct biographical entries and classify available information as relationship, educational data, positions and appointments, scholarly production, and so on. All these are great, but at this stage, as historians, we face a troublesome question: how to use this huge data in our historical studies? Huge in quantity, time, and geography. And the second troublesome question, at least I think, is whether our studies based on such databases will bring new and real contributions to the field. As an answer to the last question, as a young student of Ottoman history, I am hopeful. And I personally believe that studies utilizing such databases and computer-based techniques can bring at least precision to our historical knowledge. And more than this, a broader vision and most probably new knowledge. I will mention an article Abdurrahman Hoca and I co-authored and soon will be published in the Journal of Historical Network Studies. Actually, the process we wrote this paper and the way we handled the data and our discussions increased my hope and optimism. Of course, I'm not going to move into details about our findings and conclusions. I hope you will read it soon. Here, my target is rather the first question: how we can benefit from such a database of scholars. I will share our experience, and we hope it may set an example for other users of the database. A brief note for those who have no expertise on the Ottoman scholarly bureaucratic system. In the 16th century Ottoman Empire, a number of teaching and judicial positions were hierarchically ordered. Madrasa students, upon their graduation, started from low-paying and low-prestige teaching and judgeship positions. Then gradually climbed to positions with higher pay and prestige. Along the way, they were choosing among alternative career paths that offered different incentives and opportunities. Some paid more in the short run, others paid less, but led to higher positions in the end. And still others provided openings for scholars whose career prospects had faltered. Those who were successful in their career reached to the top of the hierarchy. I mean, chief judgeships of Anatolia and Rumelia. For further information, you can read works of Abdurrahman Hoca and Baki Hoca. They both have wonderful research and articles on this topic. On the slide, you see a screenshot from our database, positions of Şeyhülislam Ebu Suud Efendi. As you see, he started with modest teaching positions, and then in the second column, you see he reached judgeship positions, and finally to the office of the Rumelian Chief Judgeship and Chief Judiciary. And this is how it looks when you download Ebu Suud's professional mobility in an Excel sheet. The name of the columns, Ebu Suud's project ID, his project name, the position he occupied, where the position is, when he started the position, and then the same information for the successive positions. He started at İshak Paşa Medrese, then received an appointment to the Davut Paşa Medrese. Then he moved from the Davut Paşa to Mahmud Paşa, and from Mahmud Paşa to Mustafa Paşa Medrese, and so on. As you may notice, there is a relational data here. One position is connected to the next by an appointment. For example, the İshak Paşa and Davut Paşa Medreses are related to each other because an Ottoman scholar moved from the former to the latter. Based on this logic, we can prepare another Excel sheet, as you see below. In this Excel, we imagine each position as a node and the appointment as a directed relation between them. The number 1 denotes a relation exists. In other words, there is an appointment from the first one to the second one. This is our relational data. But we know the teaching and judgeship positions are different professions in their nature. To highlight the difference, we prepare another Excel sheet for our attribute data. Here, 0 refers to a professorship, number 1 refers to a judgeship, and number 2 denotes muftiship. Now we have two Excel sheets, one for our relational data and the other for attribute data. We can visualize this data in a number of softwares. Actually, we prefer to use UCINet, a software developed for social network analysis, and NetDraw, another software developed for visualization of networks. You see here the professional career of Ebu Suud. The main idea in this figure, and I think creative to some extent, is to imagine career of an Ottoman scholar as a network of positions. All positions in his career related to one another through appointments between them. Now, what if we apply the same procedure for another Ottoman scholar and visualize his career together with Ebu Suud? To give an example, I chose Çivizade, another Şeyhülislam from the same period. Here you see, in this figure, the professional career paths of Çivizade and Ebu Suud, two contemporary Ottoman scholars. As you see, their careers coincide in some points. For example, they both occupied a professorship in the Mahmud Paşa Medrese and Sahan Medreses. By drawing both careers, we attained one single network of interrelated positions. Now, the main question, what if we filter in our database all Ottoman scholars who enjoyed an appointment either to the chief judgeship of Anatolia or to that of Rumelia during a period of 1 century, and then visualize and analyze the datasets by the tools and measures developed for social network analysis? That is exactly what we did in the forthcoming article. Let me introduce our filters. We use filter options in the database and follow the steps on the slides. We wanted to analyze the careers of chief judges between 1540 and 1622. We chose 1540 because it was the beginning of the reliable document for appointments in our database. And we preferred to end our analysis in the year of Osman II's regicide. Yeah, by this filter, we found out 56 chief judges. Then we applied another filter to exclude their assignments and employments other than as professors and judges. And finally, we eliminated the appointments they received after their first appointments as the chief judges. As a result, for example, Office of Şeyhülislam was usually excluded from the analysis because appointment as the chief jurist almost always came after an appointment to chief judgeships in our dataset. As you see on the slide, we narrowed our filters in each step. First, we had a selected group of people. Then we filtered among their positions. And lastly, we imposed another time filter to have their positions prior to chief judgeship. Yeah, based on this criteria we imposed through filters, we found out 56 Ottoman chief judges during the period 1540-1622. We then downloaded an Excel sheet that contains their teaching and judgeship positions in chronological order. The date of the first appointment was 1516. As you see in the table, there were 99 teaching positions, 23 judicial positions, in total 122 positions, and there were more than 600 appointments between them. To cope with this huge data, as well as to observe the dynamic character of the network, we created two periods. Each of them were about half a century. In other words, we sliced our data set of positions between 1516 and 1622. Here I show you the graph based on the first half of our dataset. I copied it from the article. By the way, we didn't change the locations of the nodes in the graphs. They are all automatically configured by the net row according to the geodesic, number of shortest paths between the nodes. It looks quite messy, I accept, but the configuration of the red and blue nodes representing teaching and judicial positions and their distribution at the center and the periphery of the network allow many useful interpretations. For example, you may not see now clearly, but at the center of the graph is the Sahan madrasas, because it was a common station in the career line of almost all scholars in our dataset. Yeah, the figure also shows all the potential career paths via which scholars reach one of the two chief judgeships. In order to make the graph more readable, we further modified our data in the UCINet and visualized it again in NetRow. Yeah, it's here. Yeah, we wanted to eliminate appointments which occurred less than 2 times in order to visualize the core of the network. To this end, we set a frequency cutoff and recoded our dataset. You see, this graph shows the more common appointments. That's why we called it the core of the previous graph. We see here structured patterns of appointments. The numbers on the edges show the frequency of the appointments. For example, there are 3 direct movements from the judgeship of Cairo to the judgeship of Bursa. This frequency shows the strength of the connection between 2 positions. In other words, promotion of an incumbent of the judgeship of Istanbul to the chief judgeship of Anatolia was more likely than from the same position to the chief judgeship of Rumelia. As for the size of the nodes, the bigger size denotes greater between centrality scores. Between centrality is a measure calculated by the UCINet. It technically calculates how often a node stands on the geodesic paths of any other 2 nodes within the network. It shows the importance of particular nodes as bridges or stepping stones in the network. For example, here we see the node representing the Sahan matrix is really big, because it plays the role of bridge for many other teaching positions, such as Bursa Sultan Medrese and Haseki Sultan Medrese. It connects them to other teaching and judgeship positions. This indicates that one cannot move to the judgeship of Cairo without holding a professorship in the Sahan Medrese. And one can make similar interpretations for other judgeship positions as well. For example, during the period concerned, and according to our data of the careers of chief judges, one can say the judgeship of Bursa was really a critical position in one's way to chief judgeship. It was a bridge to the top of the hierarchy. Yeah, I want to stop here. I think I have already given an idea about the utilization of the data, our utilization of data about the professional careers of Ottoman scholars. Of course, we made several other interpretations on the graphs I copied on the slides, and there are many other graphs which I didn't show here. Here you see an outline of the article. So far, I have mentioned only a part of the first section. Beside graphs, we applied different measures and tools in social network analysis, such as David Craighart's graph theoretical dimensions to measure the hierarchy of positions. And we also applied cluster analysis in order to distinguish between different layers of this hierarchy. I didn't mention them all here for the purpose of my presentation. I hope you will read it soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gürzat. Our last speaker is Abdullah Karaarslan, who is going to talk about his MA project, which also uses the type of the data that we collect and organize in this database. Abdullah received his BA from the Department of History at Istanbul University in 2016. And his MA from the same university in 2019 with a thesis entitled Diverging Career Paths and Social Networks, a cohort of the students with literary talent in the Sah Madrasas in the 16th century. He is currently a PhD student and researcher of the OTTOLEGAL project at Sabancı University. His research interests revolve around scholars, poets, scholarship, and literature in the early modern Ottoman Empire. He is also interested in historical social network analysis. Abdullah.
Thank you for having me. Today, I want to talk about the application of social network theory to Ottoman scholars. Biographical dictionaries provide valuable information about the social networks of scholars. Information on place of birth, familial ties, educational background, literary ties, friendships, and enmities can be found in them. Therefore, a detailed analysis based on biographical dictionaries can shed light on the nature of social networks of Ottoman scholars. Networks and institutions came to the fore as two basic inseparable elements of society and bureaucracy in the 16th century. New social ties and networks have been introduced, and existing networks enlarged and transformed. New actors emerged during the period of bureaucratization and institutionalization. Ottoman Ilmiye bureaucracy created an indigenous certificate system that became an alternative Islamic educational and judicial institution of the early modern period through Mülazemet, which was a license to enter to the path of Ilmiye and have the right to be registered on the waiting list for the office. The Ottomans began to recruit and retain actors who had acquired Mülazemet as an institutional capital, which represents an identification and association of prevailing ideology and power. All members of the Ilmiye had to be connected to each other through Mülazemet ties in order to grant a position in the Ilmiye bureaucracy. After a while, Mülazemet as an institutional capital were also required for other scholars coming from Persian and Arab lands. every graduate students of the İlmiye formed a mülazemet tie with high dignitary scholar bureaucrats by the 16th century, which led to the creation of a dense social network among scholars. And this shows the mülazemet ties in the second half of the 16th century, and it clearly shows that Ebu Suud Efendi, Arapzade Abdülbaki Efendi, Bostan Efendi, Malül Emir Efendi were the central actors in the İlmiye network. I examined a literature class of Karamani Mehmed Efendi at San Medreses between 1553 and 1555 in my thesis. I realized that half of these 10 students, Baki, Hoca Saadettin Efendi, Sevzade, and Remzizade, became high dignitary members of the İlmiye. And while the rest of them turned to the town judgeship, Mecdi, Muhi, Camcizade, Cevri, and Valihi. And in further research on their careers, I found that they engaged in different social networks during their professional careers. Then I studied the relationship between their careers and social networks, and finally argued that their careers were shaped in accordance with their social ties and networks. Apart from mülazemet ties, there were familial ties, marriage ties, teacher and student ties, literary ties, and tariqat ties between scholar bureaucrats, which strengthened the structure of the İlmiye network. As the Ottoman Empire consolidated its power in the elevated status of imperial language. And this transformation further contributed to the establishment of a new literary network by allowing them to produce unique literary pieces distinct from Arabic and Persian literature. And moreover, the structural balance of the literary networks changed with the increase in the number of scholarly poets due to the newly established madrasas in the period. This figure shows the literary network in the second half of the 16th century, derived from Pervane Bey Mecmuası. All these edges are representing the parallel poems written by poets. Pervane Bey Mecmuası, a collection of parallel poems compiled in 1560, shows the centrality of Zati, here is at the center, Zati, and also increasing role of Baki, here is Baki, among poets, especially young generation. And those are poets who wrote parallel poems to Baki are all coming from young generation. And Baki began increasing talent among the literary network by the second half of the 16th century. It also demonstrates the interaction between poets in the first half of the 16th century. Here we see all the important names: Hayali, Nihani, Lami, Revani, and also these are the colleague of Baki, Mecdi, Valihi, Nevi. These are the students of literature class of Karamani Mehmed Efendi. Another network that I want to talk about is Palace Network. And scholar bureaucrats also engaged in Palace Network during their professional careers and lives. After the reign of Süleyman the Magnificent, the Sultan started to stay in the palace, and the residents of palace increased dramatically in the second half of the 16th century. Moreover, sultans gathered favorites around the palace and who actively engaged in Ottoman administration as new actors. Some of the İlmiye members joined the palace network and also participated some competitions via forming alliance in order to increase their centrality and power. For instance, Hoca Saadettin Efendi, who was appointed as a tutor to the prince, became one of the most central and powerful figures in the palace network after the ascension of the prince to the throne as Murat III. Here we see the palace network of Murat III. Saadettin Efendi is here. We clearly define two basic factions. One faction is Sokullu's faction, Sokullu's camp is another, and there are also other actors acting against Tokullu and finally eliminated Tokullu. Networks were also increasing their power and centrality during that period around Istanbul. Especially the Halveti order gained considerable support from royals during the second half of the 15th century, predominantly under the reign of Murat III. And there were many Halveti convents built by royal members, and these places had become centers of attraction for the Istanbul elite. During the reign of Murat III, Nevi joined several Halveti networks, while Halvetis established ties with palace circles. Thanks to his Halveti connections, Nevi succeeded in becoming a royal favorite of Murat III. Here we see Nevi's sheikhs Sarhoş Vali, Efendi, and Şaban Efendi. Finally, Nevi, thanks to his connections with Şaban Efendi, entered the palace circle of Murat III. And also, there were familial ties who are strongly related with mülazemet ties and professional support ties. Here, among these 10 students, Hoca Saadettin, Remzizade, Hüsrevzade, were coming from a Mevali family. They were Mevalizades, and they got mülazemets from Ebu Suud Efendi. Students who had strong familial ties and a chance to form ties, and less fortunate students who had no strong familial ties, such as Baki and Nevi and others, they couldn't acquire mülazemet from Ebu Suud Efendi and had to pay their dues for years before being appointed as a müderris. And this figure also shows the professional support ties during the second century, the first and second half of the 16th century. Here we see Grand Viziers, chief jurists, and tutors of the Sultan were main actors in the Ilmiye network. Baki, for instance, was to form a tie with either one of them in order to get a novitiate status as quickly as possible. And I use the term professional support instead of patronage, since professional support as a social network concept is more neutral and analytical, and patronage is resonated with saying factionalism and favoritism and does not help us to understand the nature of the social network of Ottoman scholars. And finally, I want to show this figure as Nevi's attempt to form a professional support tie by presenting oaths. Nevi wrote numerous oaths to these figures, Şemsi Ahmet Paşa, Sokul Feridun Bey, Muallimzade, and Celal Bey, in order to get some professional support. I believe that poetry play a crucial role in forming social ties with grandees of the empire. Presenting oaths, writing parallel poems can sometimes provide valuable judgeship positions in return. And Baki is also another good example for this. Baki came to the forefront with his literary ties and triumphs, especially on Ghazal style. And Hoca Saadettin had a strong palace connections inherited from his family and luckily became a tutor to the Sultan and chief jurist at the same time, as one of the most central and powerful actors in the palace bureaucracy. Nevi, coming from a Sufi family, joined several tariqat networks in the ascension of Halvetis around Istanbul, and he accompanied Murat III and gave him advice in political, mystical, and literary matters. And other students, Molla Hüsrevzade and Remzizade, they also got mülazemet from Ebu Suud Efendi and having an untroubled professional career. And the last group of the students that I mentioned here, Mecdi, Cevri, Camcızade, and Valiki, these students had neither strong familial ties nor strong mülazemet ties, and they couldn't continue their careers as notarists and had to go into township. And the reason behind this career choice is lies in their social backgrounds and networks, I believe. And further studies can trace the odes, parallel poems, lampoons, history couplets, which directly indicate connections between actors with the method of social network theory. If a more complete network be prepared in further studies, these would allow us to comprehend the complexity of transformation periods, role of social networks, and contribution of individual actors in these transformations. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Abdullah.
Thank you for all of the presenters. Thank you so much. We went way above our usual time, and I didn't want to interfere. We usually try to finish in the first hour so we can have more time for questions. So that's why I want to start the questions right away. If you do have any questions, please, those of you who are participating, you could raise your hand and then you would be on the screen, or if you would rather put it in chat, and then we would read it loud so that it would be recorded in the video that we will upload to YouTube later. And then the question could be addressed. In order to give everybody a few minutes thinking about questions, I'm just going to start first of all by, just saying congratulations. This is a great amount of work, and it shows, just to me personally, I guess it could have saved me, months of work for various articles that I worked on in recent years. If I had a data set like this, I could have, studied those who, taught at San Medrese and their familial backgrounds and their ethnicity, where they came from, and whom among them were able to go up and whom among them were not able to go up. Those kinds of questions are now going to be much more easily answerable, I think. Also, I want to commend all of you to include Arabic sources because traditionally Ottoman historians sort of trained in Turkey think of only Taşköprüzade and then Atayi and then Şeyhi, and then we end up having a mainly Turkish, Kurdish, Balkan network of scholars, and Arab scholars are left out because those people didn't include them. By including the Arabic sources, you are going to enlarge the picture, and that is really, really great too. I have some basic questions, very basic. Are you considering of including the actual texts? For instance, you click on Ebu Suud, and then is it going to be possible to see the full Ebu Suud entry in Atayi, either as a photograph or maybe if it is possible to OCR into a text? Is that something you were considering? And then the second very basic question, the interface language. In most of the stuff you showed, it was Turkish. I imagine users who are using Arabic or who are not necessarily very close to our study area, so they use English only. Are they going to be able to make a little bit of use of this database? So with two questions, I'll start, and then I hope other questions will come.
I think I can answer these two questions because they are easy, and I will refer the difficult ones to others. Including the texts in the database is an easy task. Salih says so. We can easily, we have the page numbers for each entry, but only, we may have problems, copyright problems. So if, for example, for Shaqaiq, we worked by using the copy published yazma eserler, the most recent one. It is available online, open for everybody's use. I don't know, we need to make, an agreement with them to take this text into our system, or to put a link to connect with the relevant page in this text. And we have to make the similar arrangements for the other texts. Actually, as a group, as a research team, we have the digital copies of all these, and we can easily access to the relevant page because in the database we have the exact page number for each entry. Actually, Salih designed the database in a way that we cannot proceed without entering the page numbers for each entry. So, defining the source exactly, including the page numbers, is the essential element. We have to do this first, and then enter the other data points. As for the language, our plan is to make it available in 3 languages: Turkish, Arabic, and English. Actually, my desire was to open all 3 at the same time, but after starting to work with the computer people for designing and other things, I understood that I am not talking about Salih. I am talking about the other people from whom we take service for designing the front end and for other requirements for publication. So it is very complicated. We have to provide the API data. Actually, Salih can explain this better. But so I decided to make it available one after another. First, we will open it in Turkish. Then we will translate the database into the other languages, first into English, then into Arabic. I think it is it is an easy, or it is a very standard procedure. We can do this easily. After we will be able to publish or make it public in Turkish, we will easily, make it available in the other 2 languages as well.
I was going to then suggest, please do let us know, so through HTurk, once it is out, and then update us again when it is available in English, when it's available in Arabic, so that we can announce it through HTurk to people who work on Ottoman studies worldwide. Thank you. I see Günhan raises hand. Günhan, hi, it's wonderful seeing you here, Günhan. After so long, we cannot see each other in person, but it's great to see you on screen. Günhan is joining us, I imagine, from Vienna. Are you there? Tell us. Go ahead, Günhan.
Thank you, Baki. Hello there. I'm in Budapest, but one of my feet is in Vienna, so I'm in Central Europe. Hi, everyone, and Abdurrahman, Gürzat, Abdullah, and Salih. Thank you so much for the presentation. And indeed, I agree with Baki. Wish we had this way before, and then we could really have done a lot of other things, different things in our own studies. I cannot wait to have access to this kind of a database. It's amazing, and I myself, I'm also working on a kind of my own database here with the ruling elite of the Ottomans, and hopefully at one point we will talk more about that. And this is actually one of the 2 questions I want to ask, and if perhaps Salih can help on that question, which is basically about how easy will it be to also use your model for developing other type of databases. Will it be an open source? and if not, the compatibility of your data, or whether it will be easier to, let's say, communicate with other types of data sets. So that's my first question. So did you consider about also that aspect? And second question is more about the data itself. I see that, yes, it's already an enormous information, enormous data coming from these biographical dictionaries. But when it comes to these biographical individual information, of course, there are also other types of sources which could be very critical in getting much precise information about an appointment of an ulema, or the death, the date and etc. What I mean is, like, for instance, we have the Ruznamches. Some are now available, like Yasemin Beyazıt Hoca published a couple of the Ruznamches. And of course, the Rus, particularly for the second half of the 16th century onwards, we have tremendous amount of specific data there. So Abdurrahman, sorry, did you consider also at one point, getting this kind of, more archival type of sources to be included in your data set? Thank you so much. Again, congratulations also, by the way. Thank you.
Okay. Should I start with the first question then? So how compatible is our data model first, and our database with other data sets and projects out there? And our data, how is it usable by other projects? That's what I got. So when we started the project, we decided to use proven backend and front-end technologies when we're developing. So we have a MySQL-based database that we're using, and the data model itself is actually proprietary. This is by choice. So there are some models in the digital humanities already extant, so many models actually, which are proposing a way to model biographical data. But we saw that, or we didn't see actually, a standard agreed upon way, a standard model to capture all the details that we wanted. So instead of waiting for the community to come together on some model, we decided to develop our own proprietary model, which is of course machine readable and downloadable in a standard JSON format, and also accessible by an application programming interface. So I showed some screenshots of the user interface, and which can be used by expert as well as non-expert users. But in actuality, we also have an API. So users, experts in digital humanities can write their own programming scripts and talk to the API directly, the backend server directly, to pull down the data. And of course, because it's a proprietary model, we will have to provide some documentation for that, for how the data is structured. But the content and the structure of the data is an open model. So here an important concept is the linked open data, which is, I think, known by everyone in the digital humanities. And if you consider here the classification famously by Tim Berners-Lee, the 5-star classification for linked open data, because our data is on the web in an open format, downloadable with an open license, we fall in the third, right in the middle. So we have a 3-star rating. Of course, when we want to, in a later stage, open up the data to be able to be used by other standard tooling. So if someone wants to use standard tooling to get direct access to our data, we would have to add another translation layer to do data alignment between our backend data and those models that I mentioned earlier in the digital humanities, especially in the cultural heritage sector. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Okay. As for your question about extending our source base, of course, we are open to include the data in other sources. Our platform, the infrastructure of the database is suitable for this. We can, collect information from any source and record it, this information in our database by linking it to the source. For example, for the biography of, let's say, Abu Suud Effendi, we can add unlimited number of sources and link every data point with the source from which we gather this information. So the infrastructure is suitable for doing this. Actually, we, I said that we started with Shaqaiq and continued with Atai and others, including Ghazi's Kawakib. But we recorded some data from other sources. In the database, I think we currently have collected information from more than 70 sources, I guess, from different sources. So we are open to this, and I think at the later stage, if we have time and energy and support, we will be able to include, of course, the information in the archival documents, including Ruznamches and Ru'us. That's for sure.
I think if it could also be done, the way I understand it, you refer to crowdsourcing. So in sort of theoretically speaking, somebody goes to the archives and finds, the appointment of this person's thing, and then sends you a picture of it, and then you can add that into
exactly
sources, and then create a thing there to say, okay, in Atai it is recorded like this date, but in the archival record it looks like this date, for instance. Or somebody finds the epigraphic source on the tombstone that sort of suggests a different death date and then sends you the picture. I mean, it's possible, I imagine. It's open-ended in that sense, right? It's possible that you could include data like that into your database.
Exactly. So, yeah, as you said, at the stage of crowdsourcing, we can gather, data this way, from diverse types of sources, including archives, personal documents and others. As long as we have the source and reference to the source, we can include anything.
Thank you. Emrah Şahin, who joins us from Florida, has a question. The project is exciting and promising on multiple levels, but as is presented, it seems to be focusing on an elite, exclusive, linear, and generational network set to monopolize the scholarly scene in the capital. Can our panelists, perhaps Abdullah, tell us a bit more across what times and places can the project expand?
Emrah asked the question, Abdullah Hoca, but I want to intervene and answer this question. We started, the beginning of the project was not the collection of the data, but was, the development of the database together with the collection of the data. So that's why we started with Shaqaiq, of course, which is, specific to a particular time and a particular geography. It covers mostly, Anatolia and the Balkans, and covers the centuries from 14th to mid 16th century. But when the project develops in the later stage, I think the ISAM will want to expand it to the whole Islamic history from the beginning until today. We, when we thought about the database design, we always kept this in mind. We are going to expand it and will include other periods and other geographies, and including Al-Kawakib and the other sources from the Arab lands was a good experiment. Actually, the database worked, and we could easily accommodate the requirements to record the information in these sources as data in our database. So, we are more confident now. It is not specific to Esh-Shaqaiq, or it is not specific to the continuations of the Esh-Shaqaiq, but can be expanded to other regions and other periods.
Can maybe add here that the data model that I showed is actually quite abstract in our experience to accommodate wide geography and time. So we're abstractly, the entities that we're talking about are persons, places, institutions, which are buildings or legal institutions, sources and works. So these kinds of abstract attributes will cover a wide range of the geography and the history, the time. But of course, when we go to a specific time, when we try to enter data from a certain geography of a certain time period, then we'll have more specific subtypes that we'll have to define. And the database and the model that we have is accommodating for this. The only problem is that that remains as a problem for historians. So when you try to compare data between different regions or different time periods, are you going to fall into the anachronism trap when there are different categories used? Can they be meaningfully compared or not? But adding the data to the database in an abstract model while preserving the categories of the place and the time is possible with the current model that we have. And the event-based life modeling, so the biography is modeled based on events which are spatial temporal. We also expect that to be very accommodating for all periods and geographies.
I'd like to add here something. I think maybe the point that Emrah is making is worth pursuing in one aspect, and that has nothing to do with you. You are doing everything that you can, and I can see that the database will be able to show you, people who have positions here in different Anatolian towns. It's not just Istanbul, but at the end of the day, your database is limited with your data set, and your data set in turn is limited with those scholars who were seen worthy to be included. And that, if I remember correctly, my sense about that was you had to at least have taught at the Sah to get a spot in Atai's biographical dictionary. Pretty much everyone who is in that dictionary had at some point had reached the level of Sah, or there might be some exceptions, but not too many. So for instance, Ahmed Rumi, who produced very significant works, and yet Akhisari, he doesn't have a biography devoted to him in Atai because he did not have that kind of a career path. Or and then there are a few biographical dictionaries that are only local. Like there is a few on Bursa, there is one on Edirne that sort of made attempts to include scholars who were really local, who didn't really get into larger scenes. I guess to sort of respond to Emrah, there's always going to be limitations because our sources had their own biases in picking, and probably we need to remember that while we are drawing conclusions from our sources, even though we're going to have a great representation of these sources at our fingertips, thanks to this great work. a lot of people who couldn't make it into those sources will not be able to reach. And that brings me to another question I had. At some point, Salih, you mentioned gender. Did you come across to any woman mentioned in biographical dictionaries? Because my own understanding is that in the Arabic biographical dictionary tradition, women were represented in Mamluk times, etc. But when we got to the Ottomans in Anatolia, women disappeared altogether because it was only focusing on mudarrises and jurists who had positions. Are there women in the Arabic biographical traditions of the Ottoman era from Syria?
So,
Mhm.
excuse me.
Gürzat may want to.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of Al-Kawakib, actually we encounter many women, yeah, in the 10th Hijri century, I mean 16th century. And actually we know, for example, Sehavi and his Dawul Lami collected the biographies of women in an entire separate volume. In terms of Ottoman biographical tradition, I should say we don't have entry only for those that have an entry in the, let's say, Taşköprüzade's Şakayık. We have entries for those who were referred, for example, as the daughters of the Sultan. When we enter the biography, the information available in the biography, we immediately enter or open an entry for those who are mentioned. And some of those, of course, the women. And of course, we can say they are important women, not ordinary persons. But we have entries for them too, and the database. Yeah.
I have to make a confession. Yeah, I have to make a confession. Actually, at the time when we worked on a Şakayık, we didn't have the category of gender in the database. Actually, we did not need it, I think. But then when we started to work on Atayi and Al-Kawakib, we needed this category. As I said in my presentation, we developed the database based on Şakayık, the bottom-up approach. That's why we didn't need it. Of course, we should have thought about it. We should have thought of needing it in the future, but a Şakayık is kind of strange in that respect. There is no reference to women learned or others.
And when you come across that, may I just, out of curiosity, there are often references to marriages. Then do you create like an entry for the daughter of Bostanzade, because you don't know the name is not mentioned, but there's a daughter who married this person, then you create an entry there, and then one day somebody who finds, let's say, Bostanzade's waqf and finds the name, then you can attach the name there maybe. Is it something like that?
Yeah, it's possible. We can do this, but I think there are references to marriages in a Şakayık, but there are no references to the names of the bride in the entries, as far as I remember.
Yeah, that's also what I remember. Günhan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Baki. Thank you for the answers. Yes, Ali. I think at one point I will knock your door for further information about your model, which is, by the way, which sounds really amazing and which seems really amazingly well done. Congratulations. Ellerinize, ilminize sağlık. Baki, what I want to say is what you just mentioned. Yes, indeed, Emrah's question is very important, and these data will come together as it goes, on and on and on. So at one point, the fuller picture or a much larger picture will appear. But the problem that I mentioned is including more of these, different type of sources. Abdurrahman, indeed, you have like 70, but it's also, I think, at one point is worth giving like a trial how much, for instance, new information you can gather from a published, for instance, Ruznamche. And of course, I'm sure Salih can find an easy way to, like kind of search in it and then figure out, for instance, the names and etc. Because I personally, for instance, recently come across a problem that Shaqaiq does not really include a lot of, names that were prominent at the time. And as Baki mentioned, like there's some sort of a criteria he had used. And how to resolve this issue is, of course, crowdsourcing. I mean, I can contribute, for instance, what I have found. So it will be nice also to kind of, start that process. But more importantly, combining, the information or what we can maybe, categorize as, for instance, because you mentioned about books, like the books written by, by one name. It sometimes appear, like kind of mysterious, but then the data, when you enter it, as you nicely constructed it, the results will show that there is like a missing link there, and the missing link will be the next, thing to look. So it will be nice, perhaps, at one point to generate, what is now needed, like what else people can help with. For instance, let's say I have been working on this one Mufti, Ali bin Arabi, and he turned out to be the writer of several Ghazanames, for Mehmet Murat III, Mehmet III, and Muniri Belgradi mentions him separately as his own sheikh. And then one of the Bostanzades, Ruznamche, mentions him as a Kadı and a Naib. And then, luckily I found in a reference of a manuscript. So this can be, for instance, used as a model, where we find more information, connected data, connected information. I think your database will also show us, but you may need to give a little bit more like guidelines, for us, those are interested, to contribute. I think that will be also quickly give more and more important results. Thank you so much. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Really, this is amazing.
Yeah, thank you for the comments and for the suggestions. I also want to comment on Emrah's question and the limitation that he mentions. Perhaps having this database open to crowdsourcing is one of the ways to overcome this limitation, because if one of us work on a Shaqaiq, his world is going to be limited by a Shaqaiq and some related works. But many different people working on different types of material, manuscripts, archival documents can contribute to this database to fill the gaps and perhaps provide the information not only about the elites, not only about the scholars affiliated with the government, but also others from the Arab lands, from Iran, from the Balkans, from a village in Syria. The crowdsourcing and collecting data from all different types of sources may help to overcome this limitation of being restricted to the elite and the center, a particular geography.
Thank you. I see another hand, even though we're almost at 2 hours. I cannot miss him because he's my hemsheri from Bulgaria. Grigor, please go ahead. Go ahead, Grigor.
Thanks so much. I'll be really brief, and I cannot begin without a praise. I think you guys, you're after something really, really large, and I'm really excited about what you showed us, and I really think we can say that we have some foundation that could help us all. I mean, I stop with the praise. I mean, I would like to address some issues that it was probably worth considering for the future, and they're self-apparent and they were sort of addressed already, but just let's put it straightforward. First of all, I'm sorry to say it, but I'm not a believer in crowdsourcing. I mean, that's a good wish. I don't know any project that really worked. What I hope for, nevertheless, is that this thing is so massive that ISAM would continue the funding and there'll be data inputters. You know, if it's left for the crowdsourcing, I'm not sure what is the future of that. But the second important point is, you already mentioned producing documentation and also working on the standardization of the data formats. I think in a way this is crucial because for the Ottoman studies you actually path openers, and there will be more databases in the future. You know, path openers at that scale. Okay, let me not insult those people who have smaller databases, but there will be other databases coming soon, and those need to be able to be, you know, we need to make them interoperable, and then we'll make sense of the bigger picture. And for instance, just as a reference, Byzantine studies were way ahead of Ottoman studies in this respect. You know, they have several large projects running on biographical databases, and now recently there was a workshop where they really discussed how to make their data sets interoperable, and that was a major issue, and that's self-apparent, that's a major issue. So in Ottoman studies, since we are late comers with that, let's take advantage of this fact and think well ahead what the future could show us, and that rests upon you. If you produce the documentation, other people could design their databases in accordance with what you have already done. So, sorry, that wasn't too short, but once again, great job.
This gives me an opportunity to say something that I was thinking about, but didn't know how to articulate because I'm really ignorant in technical matters. But I was talking to my colleague, Christine Filiu at UC Berkeley, and she is currently involved in starting a database herself with some work. And she mentioned that in Europe, a lot of research projects that are funded by European Research Council grants are using a framework that apparently connects to others, so that if you have one data set, it gets into conversation with others. I really have no idea about the technicalities, but that made me think, you know, are you able to do that sort of thing? I believe Salih was saying there's a certain possibilities, but maybe there are also limitations. And that also from the Arab world end, I can imagine there must be some databases in the Arab world about, you know, Muslim scholars, hadith collectors, etc., etc. Is it going to be able, these data sets, are they going to be able to talk to each other? So that's a very good point Grigor is making. Is there a way of like considering what other data sets are there out there, and then can we make them talk to each other?
So I'll answer that. So what I said earlier to Professor Günhan's question is that here in Europe, I don't know if it's probably also in the US, but I don't know. In Europe, there are several projects actually. So we have projects in the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Austria has a very developed project, Finland. So there are many projects which are institutionally supported by the European Union. And it's not the case that they all use the same backend technologies, but mostly when the project is supported by the European Research Council or some other European institution, they require that the data that the project produces is opened up in an interoperable format so that it can be used by other projects as they see fit. And to be able to do that, some projects, they, from the start, collect their data in in an ISO standard, so a standard which is already worked on by major institutions, which can encode the data in a standard format. But the problem that I mentioned is that, so we studied some of them, not all of them, and not extensively. But when I looked into most of them, is what I saw is that the state of the research at the moment, so the models at the moment, does not allow as is to take these models and encode our data immediately in them. So we have to do a lot of knowledge engineering there to develop extensions for those standards to be able in a later stage to start encoding our data in them. And the project at this stage didn't have yet the budget, time or persons to be able to do that. So we decided to collect our data semantically, albeit in a proprietary format. And when the problem arises of interoperability, putting our data out there that can be used immediately as is by other projects, then we'll have to develop that interoperability layer. So it's a software translation layer. But that is something that not only depends on us. It's not something that a small group of researchers can decide. This is something that a community of researchers, digital humanists, computer engineers, whatever, will have to come together and work upon and see what is the data actually, what are the requirements for the digital Ottoman humanists, and develop extensions for those models. So we're aware of the problem, or that it awaits us in the future, but still we wanted to go ahead and start collecting these materials instead of developing tools in search of research questions, develop tools that are answers to current research questions. That's the kind of philosophy that we were following. Thank you.
Can I say something also? We thought about this problem, how we connect our data with other data, and how can we make our data talk to the data collected by other groups. As Salih said, it is not up to us only. It is, the community of researchers or the community of the research groups need to decide on something common. If such an agreement is realized, then we are ready to transform our data to communicate with the other group's data. This is what Salih said when we discussed this issue. I think the keyword is the semantic data, right? The collecting the data on the semantic model. It makes it versatile, adaptable, and adjustable according to the needs in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There is still a hand, and I don't want to not give a turn because I think Mehmet Şirin Cengiz had his hand earlier as well, then he lowered it. So Mehmet Şirin Cengiz, please go ahead. Let's that be the last question. Go ahead, please.
Hocam, good evening. Greetings from Diyarbakır. I hope you hear me.
We
hear
you. We hear you. We cannot see you, but we hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to direct my question to Professor Atçıl. And if I'm mistaken, please correct me. But somewhere in his speech, he said that the project can be extended to contemporary times, like after World War. But we know that, some scholars think that there is no scholar, no ulema after the World War, especially when we think about Turkey, like Republican Turkey. And are they going to include into the project or extend the project to Republican Turkey? If so, what will be the criteria to choose the ulema in this period? Will they apply the same criteria to the Ottoman era, or some new criteria they will, let's say, choose?
Yeah, actually, this is one of the hopes by the administrators at İSAM. There are so many people out there who can count as alim, but do not have any records for them, especially in the contemporary period, in the Republican period. Some of these people actually produced works of high quality in Islamic studies or other topics, but there is no tabakat, there is no biographical dictionary for these people. And this database and the option of crowdsourcing may help us to collect information about these people from the contemporary period. Even though Grigor says he doesn't believe in crowdsourcing, I hope that we will be able to collect some valuable data about the people in the contemporary period. I think the crowdsourcing is especially useful for that ambition of the project to collect information about the contemporary scholars. Günhan wants to say something.
Baki.
Günhan, please go ahead. Go ahead. How can I talk to you? Please.
Okay, thank you. But here is what I suggest. I mean, I see that we have so many professors here in this forum now. I mean, what about this? For instance, I had been thinking of having one of my let's say courses, as part of the assignments of my students, they can actually work. I mean, Grigor says yes. I mean, it maybe didn't work so far. But I think we have to also rethink how we can do this. Yes, individually we can just, dedicate our time, energy. But how about, for instance, we also now design courses, with our students, undergraduates, graduates, that either solely, it will be a course to crowdsource, a project, like for instance, Baki, you are teaching, Islamic history and all that, or part of the assignments, we can do. So I think this might be a good way. I don't know. This just had been in my mind, so I just wanted to say right away here, since it's mentioned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, my students at University of California, Davis couldn't read Ottoman Turkish. I have some graduate students, but then if I were to ask them, I would look for funding. And then I think because it would be unfair to ask them to do something outside their dissertation projects. So the question comes to institutions, I guess. Institutions that could support such work could create maybe more institutionalized crowdsourcing opportunities. And then there are always people like, for instance, you find things and you want to write, and I guess that would support Abdurrahman's project really well. I have one announcement to make, because this is a group that is all about digital humanities, digital Ottoman studies. The Journal of the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association will have a special issue devoted to digital Ottoman studies, and that issue is being co-edited by Ali Aycıoğlu, my colleague at Stanford, Nora Barakat, also at Stanford, and Yunus Uğur, who also used to be at Şehir and joined Marmara University recently. Please keep an eye on it. Actually, a call for papers has been issued. You could find it in H-Turk, and I will also include it in my next monthly message to the larger OTSA email list. Consider either sending a paper or definitely reading it when it comes out. It's going to be the next fall issue. And then I see that Emrah Şahin sent a note. Let me read that too. In favor of crowdsourcing, I think it delivers well when incentive is given, contributor is credited, process is streamlined to input data, and our panelists filter the incoming data. I think they were already planning to do that. Abdurrahman mentioned how there's going to be a sort of a filtering process to make sure tahqiq will be done. Verification is very important, of course. Oh, Zeynep Yelchi is asking for the deadline. Zeynep, I'm very sorry. I don't remember the deadline for submission of papers.
March, I think.
But H-Turk has the announcement. Was it March, Abdurrahman?
I think March 2022. Nükhet is here, but I don't know.
Yes, she just couldn't answer it. She asked me to announce this. Let's go with March. Let's go with March, but check it on H-Turk. H-Turk should have the announcement, Zeynep. If you want, I can email it to you. Thank you so much for all of you, especially, of course, our presenters, Abdurrahman, Salih, Abdullah, Gürzat. Thank you so much for making time to come and join us on top of build this huge data set for us to use. Thank you, and thank you for all of our listeners.
Thank you.
Please don't forget, next month we have 2 events. We'll be meeting together to talk about translations, Ottoman translations, and also another European Research Council funded project, the one that is led by my colleague Tiana Kristic at Central European University with Derin Terzioğlu. They'll be having their team presenting some of the work that they've been doing, some of which is already published in edited volumes, and another one, a source book, is coming out, and I think they will tell us about that source book. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful week.